Well, hello and welcome back to another theory reaction today. Alright, today's victim is ID's fantasy. We were wrong. The FNAF 4 location isn't Fredbear's, and I can prove it. And I hope it's good.
There isn't much known for sure in Five Nights at Freddy's, but there are a few things that are either directly confirmed or have enough evidence that they're treated as confirmed by most of the fanbase. While some of these topics may still be debated, one that is generally taken as fact is that the FNAF 4 minigames where the crying child gets bitten by Fredbear take place at Fredbear's family diner. After all, the animatronics present are Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. The game takes place in the early 80s, before most of the games except for the recent Secret of the Mimic, and Fredbear's was the predecessor to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. However, just because something is widely believed, that doesn't mean it's necessarily true.
I like it, ID's fantasy. Thank you for saying that. That is the whole reason why we're here, the whole reason why I'm here in front of you, in front of all of you. Because there's a lot of stuff that people say are facts, and they're not facts.
And the more I've looked into the topic, things just haven't added up the way they should. From the route between the crying child's home and the restaurant, to the connection Secret of the Mimic has to Fredbear's in the events of FNAF 4, to the animatronic the crying child is implied to possess, to the very year the game takes place, I've become increasingly convinced that the crying child wasn't bitten at Fredbear's family diner. Instead, I think the bite of 83 happened at one of the first Freddy Fazbear's pizzas, and I have the evidence to prove it.
You have the evidence. They better be fast facts. If they're not fast facts, I will take you down so fast. That was aggressive. I'm sorry. I apologize. All right. I've been very stressed lately. With the movie coming out, there's so much fake FNAF lore out there. It's crazy.
To set the stage, since most of the games I'm going to be pulling information from are multiple years old at this point, I think it's a good idea to give a refresher on the relevant games and the information we have from them before I get into the meat of why I'm attempting to overturn one of the most widely agreed upon pieces of lore in franchise history. Technically speaking, we see Fredbear for the first time in FNAF 1, though at this point in the timeline, the character is known as Golden Freddy due to having been modified and having his accessories altered a bit in the time since the character was in his original Fredbear form. However, the first mention of the name Fredbear itself, or Fredbear's Family Diner, came in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, where after the incident that is heavily implied to be William Afton going for round 2 of murders at Freddy's during the day shift, the phone guy mentions that they're trying to get in contact with the owner of the original restaurant, which he thinks is called Fredbear's Family Diner, though the restaurant has been closed for years and he doesn't think they'll be able to track anyone down. While FNAF 3 doesn't mention Fredbear's directly, an old recording of Phone Guy does mention Fredbear himself as one of 2 Springlock animatronic suits that, along with Spring Bonnie, was used at the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza he worked at up until multiple simultaneous Springlock failures at a sister location led to them no longer being used. The Springlock suits doubled as animatronics and costumes, with Springlocks being wound to hold the animatronic parts to the sides of the suits for a human performer to fit inside. However, the Springlocks weren't the most stable, and if they failed, the metal parts would return to their original positions regardless of whether or not there was still a person in there, which we see happen to William Afton in the End of Night minigames after he gets into the Spring Bonnie suit.
Imagine having a bunch of metal shoved into your body everywhere all at once.
Get to FNAF 4, which comes in 2 parts. One part has us play as a crying child in the year 1983, who hears his Fredbear plushie talking to him and is bullied by his older brother for being scared of animatronics, despite liking plushies of Fredbear and the Freddy's characters. The crying child lives within walking distance of a restaurant where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie Springlock suits were in use, and a picture of Fredbear is on the wall of the restaurant, though there is a TV show and plenty of toys and other merch that depict the main Freddy's game as well. This part of the story comes to a head on the crying child's birthday, when the older brother and his friends, all wearing masks of the Freddy's characters, put the crying child in the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic, which happens to bite down, leading to what's known as the bite of 83 and the crying child later flatlining in the hospital. The other part is a bit more complicated, but based on the FNAF 1 phone call audio and the ambiance, the random hospital equipment, medication and flowers that can appear, the map and sister location, the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, and the Phone Guy interactive novel, the main nights of FNAF 4 are the crying child haunting his older brother Michael Afton.
That's a lot of lore you just mentioned, but yep.
Was a security guard at Freddy's in FNAF 1 by sharing his memories with him. Part of that is presumably in the form of the 8-bit minigames, but during the main nights, Michael is forced to take the role of his little brother facing down nightmarish versions of the Freddy's animatronics. It turns out, William Afton was always an awful parent because in the underground facility that would eventually become the setting of Sister Location, he set up these rooms to experiment with fear in children by making them face nightmarish situations by pumping the rooms full of nightmare hallucination gas. While the Tales from the Pizzaplex books have a random kid named Rory be the one who experiences the experiments, the fact that the Tales books aren't in the game continuity, how a similar instance of a random character taking the place of the player character in FNAF 3 happens in the Fazbear Frights books, and other things I go over in a previous video more specifically dedicated to Midnight Motorist, it seems like the victim of the nightmare experiments in the game timeline was the crying child, which likely factored into his fear of the animatronics that we see in the 8-bit minigames. This is backed up by Sister Location, which not only has a map that shows the bunker is connected to each of the locations from FNAF 4, but in the private room, there's a Fredbear plushie with what looks like a walkie-talkie, as well as cameras that show the FNAF 4 rooms when the code 1983 is put into the pin pad, showing how William ran and monitored the nightmare experiments from there.
Yeah, Sister Location and FNAF 4 were very, like, closely tied together, because I think when FNAF 4 came out, and Scott realized that, oh, you know, the whole lore of FNAF 1 to 4 was supposed to be, it was all a dream with Dream Theory. And then the FNAF community was like, that's stupid. We're going to tell you how it is. You did this. You did this. So anyway, Scott came out with Sister Location to kind of tie up the FNAF 4 loose ends and kind of set FNAF in a new trajectory. And look where we ended up. Was it worth it?
This game is Pizzeria Simulator, and the main thing of note in the game itself are two of the minigames. One of them is the Security Puppet minigame, which takes place on a rainy night, and in conjunction with a similar minigame in FNAF 2, shows how William Afton's first victim, Charlie Emily, died and possessed the puppet animatronic after being locked outside of Freddy's. While there are theories that she wasn't his first victim, considering how she was mentioned as the first victim in both the novel trilogy and the FNAF 2 movie trailer, and how her father in the games claims that he was the first one wounded by William's actions that ended up with the other kids getting killed, I'm inclined to believe she is the first in the games as well.
Yeah, I believe that too. The line that I think ID is pointing out is in Ultimate Custom Night, when Withered Chica, I believe, when Withered Chica kills you, her voice line says that, I was the first, I have seen everything. And then everyone was like, hold on, you were the first? And it was just really random, and it threw everything off because we assumed it was either Charlie, the puppet, that was the first death, or Cassidy, Golden Freddy, that was the first death. But yeah, it was just weird. But I think Charlie Emily being the first one, as proven by what ID just said, that makes way more sense.
Also note it was probably Freddy specifically, since the character shown in the FNAF 2 version of the minigame has a black, not purple hat and bow tie and is labeled Freddy in the files. And a recently released activity kit talks about how at Freddy's there were wristbands were given to the kids as a souvenir and a way to track them, with a black light drawing of Charlie from the Security Puppet minigame, where she's wearing a wristband to signal to the puppet to keep her in the building, implying that Freddy's giving the kids wristbands is connected to why Charlie has a wristband. Charlie then got trapped outside, William drove up, killed her, and drove away, and the puppet made it to her body but collapsed on it due to the rain. This minigame presumably connects to the lore portion of the Midnight Motorist minigame, which takes place on a rainy night and is labeled later that night in the files. We drive home in the rain as a character that is heavily implied to be William Afton, both via his purple car, how the upcoming 5 Laps at Freddy's game has a vehicle called the Midnight Motor
so excited
with
for
the
5
rabbit antenna, and some other things that I go into more detail about in my Midnight Motorist video. On his way home, he can stop in a clearing that has a weird dirt pile looking thing, and at a building labeled Juniors. If he approaches Juniors, the green character outside tells him he knows he can't be there and to not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Once William reaches his home, going inside reveals a character wearing gray watching TV who tells William to leave some other him alone because he had a rough day, only for William to not do that, and head to his son's room and demand entry. When the door is locked and won't open, William goes outside to try and get in through the window, only to find it broken, with a trail of footprints leading away from it. A pair of 3-toed footprints is visible near a bush, and while William doesn't acknowledge them, he says, ran off to that place again. He will be sorry when he gets back. After Pizzeria Simulator comes Help Wanted. There are a few neat lore confirmations here, such as the Faz tokens that confirm Freddy's has been around since 1983, as well as DLC where there's an alternate hub world with a large banner that says,
and I will say, I think ID's going to get into this, but this is just a recap of all the facts before the hammer falls, and I hope that she has substantial enough evidence piled up to depict that the FNAF 4 location is not Fredbear's. We'll see. But yeah, it's really interesting because 1983 is when Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was established. And that is, I believe, 4 years after the events of Secret of the Mimic, where Edwin was in charge of making the restaurant animatronics and overall helping for that. He also helped out in Fredbear's Family Diner with the Springlock suits. So one thing that's important to note is the reason why you see Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy in FNAF 4 as like plushies in 1983 is because that's when the Withered location opened. The very first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was open. With the very weird, ugly versions of the animatronics, which then later were used as parts for the toy location that came out in 1987.
It's Fall Fest 83 and shows a house up on a hill that looks suspiciously similar to the house shown on the FNAF 4 menu screen. Help Wanted also teases the game's security breach by showing its location, the Pizzaplex, under construction. However, what the teaser doesn't show, but security breach itself does, is that the Pizzaplex was built on top of a sinkhole containing a few weird things, including but not limited to a giant Freddy head, the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and an area deeper underground containing a giant old computer-labeled mixes, a hostile endoskeleton called the Mimic, and some old fabric costumes that aren't Freddy's related. Help Wanted 2 doesn't go into this too much more, though it does take place in the pizzeria simulator location, and has a somewhat notable ending involving playing a VR version of the arcade game that randomly has the sister location elevator in it, which is interesting. However, the next game, Secret of the Mimic, is where things
FNAF.
get extra interesting. Set at the earliest point we have in the FNAF timeline, in the year 1979, Fredbear's Family Diner and Chica's Party World are the only Fazbear-related locations that we're aware.
Okay. I'm gonna stop you right there, ID's Fantasy. I haven't done my Fast Facts video yet for Secret of the Mimic, but I just completed the entire game. Chica's Party World is very interesting. Chica's Party World is not owned by Fazbear Entertainment. It's not. And the reason why is because specifically, let me go back here, because I think you actually flashed it on screen. There we go. Dear Miss Murray, Fiona is amazing. The client is very happy with her chicken designs. Their sales are through the roof. I just wish the costume looked a little bit more like Fiona's art. I'm worried about how it will work with the kids. It gives me nightmares, Milton. So this one here, what I want to point out is they're referring to the owners of Chica's Party World as the client. And there's a specific room in Murray's Costume Manor, which I'll flash on screen here for you guys, where it actually shows the original plans for Chica, the original suit designs, all the marketing, the fact that Mr. Cupcake was just one of many tiny, cute food creatures, I guess. And what's very interesting is none of the posters, none of the documents, none of them in that room states property of Fazbear Entertainment. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because in other rooms in Murray's Costume Manor, there's posters of Lally's Lollies, for example, where in the bottom right corner it says property of Fazbear Entertainment. Fazbear Entertainment owns that brand, owns that company, stuff like that. And the fact that that is not on any of the Chica's Party World stuff is really weird. So I think Chica's Party World is not owned by Fazbear Entertainment. They're owned by a separate company. It wasn't until later that Fazbear Entertainment, when they acquired Murray's Costume Manor, that they most likely also acquired Chica's Party World as well. But yeah, I don't believe that Fazbear Entertainment owns Chica's Party World, or at least did not own it at the time of Secret of the Mimic in 1979.
World are the only Fazbear-related locations that we're aware of being open at the time, with the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza chain being planned to open later. We play as Arnold, a Fazbear technician sent to get the Mimic from Murray's Costume Manor, a former contractor that Fazbear Entertainment acquired. MCM was owned by Edwin Murray, the Mimic's creator, and after the death of his wife and son, Edwin lashed out and the Mimic, specifically the M2 variant, imitated and absorbed his rage, leading to it killing anyone who entered the building. While exploring, there are a few interesting discoveries that can be made. For example, there are messages from characters in the game that you can collect that indicate William was actively poaching
Ken, after one interview, they offered me the job. It happened so quick. No questions about my work or skills. They asked one question. When can you start? I'm going to make double what I make here. You should come with me. There's a referral bonus if we can get more Murray employees to jump ship. Yep. And then, yeah, staff contacts. That was William Afton asking for, well, allegedly William Afton, WA, asking for all the staff contacts. So yeah, he was actively poaching. Again, I'm going to do like a huge deep dive into what actually happened there, because whenever the business related stuff comes up, I foam at the mouth. I love it. I love the business. But yeah, this was a hostile takeover in the literal physical sense of a hostile takeover, where he was actively sabotaging Murray's Costume Manor, poaching all of their employees and clients, and just like, you know, bringing them all over before he finally bought the entire company from Edwin's
employees to drive him out of business and acquire his property, including the land his home was built on. Though it wasn't just poaching the employees that damaged Edwin's financial stability. Edwin was was banking his ability to recover on the success of the Fazbear project he was contracted to help with, which we see in the games as a prototype of the FNAF 1 location, which interestingly has a giant Freddy head outside of it and contains a machine that looks like Mix's, though this one is primarily active as the original Mimic program M1 and is labeled F10N4 since it copied Fiona, Edwin's wife. The prototype Freddy's and MCM are also connected to the Murray household through a series of tunnels, which is an interesting construction choice, and the house itself gets even more interesting in how it holds some of the costumes that show up in the Mimic's area of ruin, and has a bedroom that has toys from and overall looks suspiciously similar to...
Yeah, so this, I believe, was the moon ending. I didn't actually get to do this ending in my playthrough of the game, but yeah, you're literally in what looks like the FNAF 4 room, or something inspired by the FNAF 4 room, with the white closet. You have the purple robot in the corner here. I hate this guy. I think where ID's going here is that Murray's Costume Manor and the house on the hill are basically on the exact same property as FNAF 4 and sister location.
The FNAF 4 bedroom that shows up on the sister location cameras, though with a different layout. In addition to the information from the games, there's something else that I need to address for context, and that is the franchise guidebooks. There have been points where the series guidebooks either suggest things are possible that quite literally aren't, say things happened that didn't, or otherwise mess up details about the series.
Like
for
what?
example, the Ultimate Guide says that sister location takes place at Circus Baby's Pizza World instead of Entertainment and Rentals, and that Bone Dude in FNAF 3 says that FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after the last Freddy's closed, even though he never actually said that, and a page before the book said we don't know what event FNAF 3 is 30 years after. I bring this up because in the character encyclopedia, we get two seemingly contradictory pieces of information. While the Crying Child's page says that the restaurant was Fredbear's Family Diner, the locations page says, in reference to the FNAF 4 bedroom, that it's where a child is haunted by terrible memories of a visit to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Considering I doubt that the FNAF 4 minigames could have taken place at both Fredbear's and Freddy's, and how the guidebooks aren't the most reliable, I'm not going to use this information as evidence one way or the other. Another book-related thing I should mention is the interactive novel The Week Before, which is set the week before FNAF 1, when Phone Guy was working security at Freddy's. In the book, the bite of 83 is brought up if you, as Phone Guy, choose to call 1983 on the phone. And the book mentions that while he doesn't remember when the first Freddy's opened or when Fredbear's did, one year that stuck out was 1983, which was known as the year of the Big Bite up until a bite happened again in 1987. Calling the number leads to him hearing the events of the bite of 83 and then getting bitten himself after the sound of crying continues after the call's end. Not only does this strengthen the idea that the crying child's spirit is present at Freddy's, likely in the Golden Freddy suit since it used to be Fredbear, but I find it notable that while Fredbear's Family Diner is mentioned, it's not to say that the bite took place there, and Freddy's is mentioned in the same way in the same sentence. And this connects to the reason why I started considering this theory in the first place. After all, it's pretty widely accepted in the FNAF community that the crying child is one of the spirits in Golden Freddy that was present at the FNAF 1 location. And
okay, with Golden Freddy specifically, it's such a cluster of nonsense, and just Golden Freddy has always just been this mysterious person. Everyone's saying that there's 2 spirits in them, there's 4 spirits, there's only 1, there's no spirits, Golden Freddy doesn't even exist. There's a lot there, so.
That's something The Week Before backs up with this scene, and that I go into more depth about in a previous video I'll have linked in the description if you want to check it out. We do know from FNAF 3 that Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were used at Freddy's location, since Phone Guy himself records training tapes for using them, but one thing that's bothered me for a while was why the crying child would possess the Freddy's version of Fredbear in the first place if he was bitten by and presumably possessed the Fredbear at Fredbear's Family Diner. At first I thought that maybe Fredbear just got moved to Freddy's after Fredbear's closed, but then there was the issue of Freddy's opening for the first time in 1983, the same year that FNAF 4 took place. If Freddy's was open simultaneously with Fredbear's, and Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were used at both, why wouldn't they both have their own Fredbears even if Fredbear's Family Diner eventually shut down? It's not impossible that Fredbear got moved after, of course, but it got me thinking, what if the crying child got bitten at Freddy's instead? Freddy's was open for the first time the year that FNAF 4 takes place, after all, and if this was a Freddy's, that could potentially explain not only why he would possess the same Fredbear that went on to become Golden Freddy, but also why there's so much Freddy's merch around, including the bullies' masks. Not to mention, if the Freddy's franchise just started, it makes a lot of sense that William would be spending more time at and hosting his kid's birthday party at a Freddy's instead of the diner that Freddy's is meant to replace. We do have a teaser for FNAF 4 that shows Fredbear's hat and bow tie along with faded text that lines up best with Fredbear's Family Diner, which seems to imply that the Fredbear in FNAF 4 was the one at Fredbear's, but the source code for the teaser didn't say 1983. It said 1982, the year before Freddy's opened. So what if it was property of Fredbear's in 1982, only to become property of Freddy's in 1983?
What do you mean by property of Fredbear's and property of Freddy's? Are you talking like it's being housed in the locations? Because yeah, sure. Or are you talking like Fredbear's Family Diner as a company, and then Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, owned by Fazbear Entertainment, as a company. Because it gets real confusing really fast if we're not clear on the ownership here.
While this isn't the strongest evidence on its own, with what we know and can otherwise theorize about the Afton house and its proximity to other locations in the games, it would actually line up painfully well. While the FNAF minigames are often simplified in terms of scale, as well as what areas and objects are and aren't shown for the sake of the 8-bit style and locked camera, we do know from the FNAF 4 minigames that the restaurant is within walking distance of the crying child's home, and that the general route he takes is from the restaurant towards the road, turning to his right to continue along the sidewalk by the road, and then right again to go up to his house. And
yeah, it's like right next to the to the pizzeria.
Remember when I mentioned that there was a giant Freddy head? While the Freddy head under the Pizzaplex doesn't look identical, it's similar enough to be reminiscent, especially when combined with the whole finding an extra
100%.
Freddy's under a building that's not supposed to have one there thing. And with there being so many other similar objects and entities down there, not to mention the tunnels and elevator during the Mimic chase, that makes it seem really likely that not only was the Pizzaplex built on top of the FNAF 6 pizzeria, but that same location is where Murray's Costume Manor used to be. We do know from Secret of the Mimic that after Edwin fell into financial ruin, William ended up with possession of the property, both for the Costume Manor and for the land Edwin's family home was built on, though he assured Edwin that he wouldn't touch the house. We'll be coming back to that later, but that would explain how Fazbear Entertainment would have the ability to build over that property. Not only that, but it seems incredibly likely that the FNAF 6 location and the tunnels underneath the building are connected to sister location. The underground rooms and tunnel system, both in MCM and the underground of the FNAF 6 pizzeria, are reminiscent of Circus Babies, especially considering the Scooper ending of Ruin and Help Wanted 2. Help Wanted 2 takes place in the FNAF 6 location under the Pizzaplex, and while the Vanny mask the player character wears distorts their perception, I find it incredibly suspicious that part of beating the Princess Quest 4 game in Help Wanted 2 involves taking the sister location elevator.
Yeah, it was very weird.
Due to the mask, the exact appearance isn't going to be true to life, but either way, it's an interesting detail to include considering the breaker room map in sister location. On that map, there are little squares depicting animatronic locations, including the ones in Circus Babies Entertainment and Rental, but also in both of the Nightmare Experiment chambers, and more importantly, in one building with 2 dots that's in turn connected to a set of 4 rooms that have the exact layout of the Afton house in the FNAF 4 minigames.
Yeah.
So since the other 2 areas are underground experiment chambers based on Tales from the Pizzaplex, sister location is connected to the FNAF 4 restaurant. And while these connection symbols could be the path the crying child took, the fact that they're included on this map implies to me that they're meant to represent tunnels considered to be part of Circus Babies, just like some of the other symbols on the map.
Yeah, like usually, if you would have shown me this video a couple years ago before Secret of the Mimic, I would have said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, throw it out. Now, after playing the game and honestly listening to what everyone's saying about it, this makes a lot of sense. And I strongly believe that sister location does take place in that endless basement that Secret of the Mimic has. There's so much room down there, and there's so many corridors and so much, like, just weird stuff that, like, you can totally fit a whole experimental facility down there and no one would really question it.
And if that's the case, not only would that mean the FNAF 4 restaurant is built in the same spot as Murray's Costume Manor, but that the tunnels connecting to the Murray house in Secret of the Mimic are now represented on the map by markings connecting to the Afton house. Remember how earlier I mentioned that the house on the hill in Curse of Fredbear looks identical to the main menu screen of FNAF 4, with both games being connected to the year 1983? To me, this gives the impression that the house on the hill is the one the Aftons were living in during the events of FNAF 4. And interestingly enough, in Secret of the Mimic, the title screen of the game shows Edwin's old house at the top of a hill overlooking Murray's Costume Manor.
Yeah, let me move my camera. Hold up. Yes, so basically, they're talking about this house here, right here. Also, what's important to note is that this location, this entire space of Murray's Costume Manor, is also right next to a lake, which kind of looks like the same lake that you see in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, with Fall Fest, like the banner Fall Fest 83 on it. So again, just further proves that this can all be on the same land.
And we have a note from William saying that of course he isn't going to touch Edwin's home, except then Edwin goes missing. And Edwin's son's room looks to be the inspiration for the Nightmare Experiment room. And in one of the endings, things start burning down, and well, William owns the land, doesn't he? So why not build a new home and a new restaurant where the old ones used to be, and put his new Nightmare Experiment and dangerous animatronic storage and rental facility in the underground research and development area? He owns that now too, after all. And if he did build a new restaurant over where MCM used to be, I don't think it would have been been a Fredbear's. Fredbear's Family Diner was a small single location that we know for a fact already existed elsewhere at the time, and it wouldn't make sense to build another Fredbear's when there were already plans to start a brand new restaurant chain that had a prototype under that very building. A new restaurant chain that was set to open in the year 1983 and feature not just Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, but other animatronic characters that there would have to be merch for. A restaurant chain he would be personally involved with running, so why not move closer to where one of its first locations would be? One where his son would get bitten by Fredbear the year the franchise started, and go on to possess the animatronic, only to be joined by another spirit later on and become Golden Freddy. A new restaurant that would be one of the first Freddy Fazbear's pizza places. For all I know, there's a piece of evidence I overlooked that can't be interpreted to work with the location being Freddy's, but the more time goes on, and the more evidence I see, the more I'm convinced that this has to be the case and that it's something the games have been trying to tell us for years.
Okay. So let me wrap my head around this theory overall. I kind of got lost in the sauce a bit. You're saying that the FNAF 4 location that we play as in those mini games as the crying child is not Fredbear's Family Diner. It's actually Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that has the same characters from Fredbear's Family Diner, and it's all built on the same land that Murray's Costume Manor is on because it lines up with the layout of sister location. All right, so as you know, with these theories, I like to rate it on 2 different metrics. Metric number 1 is, did this theory make sense, and can I see it happening in the overall Fazverse? And the second metric is, was this theory well supported? So for the first one, I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10, mainly because this theory was interesting. You're saying that the Fredbear's Family Diner location, FNAF 4, right, is not actually the Fredbear's Family Diner location. You're saying that's the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location because of its placement, alleged placement, using sister location as evidence and Secret of the Mimic as evidence and stuff like that, because we know from Secret of the Mimic that Fredbear's Family Diner is supposed to be elsewhere, but in sister location's map in the breaker room, it's supposed to be on top of Secret of a Mimic based on its location relative to the house on the hill, which was then used as evidence in FNAF 4 and the Curse of Dreadbrook DLC. If that made no sense to you, you need to lock in. I don't know, it doesn't sit right. So that brings me to my second metric. Did the evidence accurately support the overall theory? And for that, I give it a solid 8 out of 10. It was really well done. There was a very well supported theory using a lot of solid evidence. The reason why it's an 8 out of 10 and not higher is because you're using, evidence from sister location and also from FNAF 4, stuff like that. Again, games that were made by Fazbear Entertainment where we don't actually know what the real world events those games were based off of are yet. So again, for all we know, all that evidence could be fictitious. We're still trying to decide what is and what isn't. It's gonna be very hard. But other than that, I really like the use of calling out the Ultimate Guide and calling out the Character Encyclopedia, saying that there's a lot of things that contradict in there, so you're just going to throw out that. You could have used a lot of that stuff as supporting evidence as well, but since it was contradicting other things, you decided to just say, you know what, I'm going to find better solid evidence for my point, and that's what I really liked. So yeah, your theory was very well supported. It made a lot of sense with the evidence you implied. It's just the theory in itself seems a little iffy. It doesn't sit well with me. It sits like a rock in bed sheets. It's just uncomfy. Anyway, I will see you in whatever Five Nights at Freddy's content you find me in next. Goodbye.